Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for these masterclass sessions. I'm your host and organizer, Renee McDonald, and I have decided to talk today about COVID and hope. And I think that is something that just has kept coming at me since the start of this pandemic, and where we're at in life at the moment. So I just thought I'd share a few things and just a few thoughts just to start off with. So we are, I guess, in a really interesting position in our community at the moment. We're in an interesting position in the world. Who'd have known, and I'm regularly talking to this now, who'd have known this time last year that things would be as they are right now? So what my belief that the therapy community and therapists need to be continuing to think about is to think critically. So this talk is all about thinking critically about how we can offer more hope when everything seems so hopeless. And I think what I will draw on is from some of my background, some of my experiences, but also in addition to that, I think we need to even draw from history here in what might have worked for people like Viktor Frankl, what might have worked from people in, any kind of concentration camps, any kind of big, massive issues. And it might appear at the moment like that's not the kind of thing that's happening to us. And yet at the same time, is it not that we're being asked to do things that are outside the norm of, if we look back on it, this time last year, a lot of our freedoms have gone. So we need to be looking at this, I feel, from an existential perspective for the therapists out there in the room, and also listening back to this, is really thinking kind of deeply about what is really going on for me and my feelings right now, and also what is going on for you and your feelings right now. Even if we think, oh, COVID and hope, that's two potential oxymorons perhaps, or two potential extremes, because certainly if we see all the swathes of pictures of death and destruction, whether we've even had at the start of the year with the fires, we've had throughout the year a lot of exposure to just a lot of carnage, and then how do we still keep hold of that hope? So this has been something that I've been regularly pondering on this year. How do I keep going when I'm being pushed to give so much more? I'm being pushed to hold the candle of hope, whether it's for therapists, hold the candle of hope for my practice with my clients, hold the candle of hope within my training to ensure that people don't feel completely overwhelmed, hold the candle of hope for the next generation of therapists if we're losing clients courtesy of more Medicare funding, holding the candle of hope for all of these types of things that have been coming up. So this is, I guess, why I thought this talk in particular needed to be this, as well as the fact that we all know if we've focused so much on the negativity, the fear, the anxiety, that it actually is only going to breed more of that. So I wanted to bring this in as almost like the behind what and why I decided to have this as a topic of interest, as something to converse about, and so this could bring about some interesting topics and things that could pose conflict, which is really interesting to say out loud. And so I think that's also something of which I actually find hope, which is also interesting and strange to say that actually the point of, when I originally trained about 20 years ago, the point of often conflict is that point of, oh, this is feeling uneasy, this is feeling not right for me. But sometimes in that finding and jarring, on the other side of that, perhaps we can find what what a musical term is, the dissonant chord sometimes can then become the harmony, but we have to be able to step up to the plate and actually name things. So that's what I wanted to bring in, just as the pretext to this conversation tonight. So I hope that is also something interesting, but I also wanted to bring this concept. There's, this never-ending kind of cliche in the past, but we're not really talking to these kind of things, is where there's life, there's hope. And in addition to that, you've got people like Dennis O'Hara from, he used to work at ACAP and he's now mostly in private practice. But Dennis O'Hara's work around hope, I believe, is pivotal in these times as well. So I also wanted to just make sure I mention his work. And I'm super glad we've got Richard Hill here at the conference too. His work on possibility and curiosity and mirroring hands, all of these things, and creativity as well. He talks regularly about that too, as do I, but I guess I come just from another angle on that. But that if we can talk to these concepts of possibility, curiosity, hope. So I think the missing piece of the puzzle, this is my perspective, because that's often what religion and spiritual practice talks to, is hope, actually. So even though there might be in certain traditions, like the Buddhism talks about suffering, but it's actually about, well, if we acknowledge the dark, we can be then more aware of the light, which is also fascinating to say out loud. So the Jungian perspective is that, there is always the shadow, and the yin yang, where we have the light and the dark, they can't exist without each other. So whilst if we're focusing just on the dark or just on the light, we seem to miss the picture. Just like positive psych can't be that on its own, it has to look at something else. So that's kind of the premise of our discussion this evening. I wanted to now put it over to either Annette or Neville, who's here, and just for you guys at home, if you're listening back to this, is maybe to ponder, to reflect, to journal about some of the comments I've just made. And I'm hoping this will be a more expansive conversation, to be able to sit into the uncomfortable parts of ourselves rather than being in denial. It looks like, Neville, you wanted to say something?
I'm not sure if I've formed my thoughts yet, but certainly things are forming.
Cool. This is good. This is good. Anything yet that you just want to talk to?
It's interesting that you bring up Dennis O'Hara, because he was one of my lecturers in my training. So it's like I used some of his, well, we had to study his book on, I think, a transformation to hope or something to that effect. I can't remember what it was, but I have a copy at home. And the whole thing of the therapeutic space is about helping people to find hope. But when world circumstances seem to be, well, actually, I don't know. We've got very opposite responses going on. We've got some very hopeless stances that are being presented, but we've also got some very, the world is getting better and we're moving into something great and so on. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of connect between those two things. It's kind of like people see one camp or the other, and it seems the people who are going rah, 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 we've got a wonderful future ahead of us, seem to discount the reality of where we are.
Yes.
And who are getting stuck in, this is the situation and how it's impacting me, and this is the overwhelm.
Yes.
Where do we go from here, and where is the future?
Yes. Yes.
And a lot of fear and anxiety can reside in that space. And it's like, how do we hold the two of them?
Absolutely. And I thought it was essential to bring in someone like Viktor Frankl's, thought process in his search for finding meaning, because I think it doesn't matter whether we're in the absolute depths of hell or if we're just dealing with putting a mask on our face when that's never happened in our lives. it actually almost doesn't matter, because I think sometimes we can underplay these small little things that can be just little chinks away from our freedoms in the existential camp. It's, if we've got too many responsibilities, we lose our capacity for freedom, because it's like a pendulum swing between freedom and responsibility. So, yeah. I like that you brought in that you liked Dennis's work, because I really love his work on hope, because it's his perspective that without hope, psychotherapy and counselling can't work.
Well, it can't. There's no healing if there's no hope. If people think that nothing can be better, then why are they even engaging in the process?
Yeah. I guess there's also a concept called therapeutic futility too, which is the opposite of the hopeful perspective. And sometimes therapeutic futility is necessary if people are trapped in a domestic violence situation. There's sometimes, what if we sometimes have to work where there's no hope to then find hope? That's something else to think about as well. Is almost, even if it's occasionally it's working towards hope, perhaps. Or something.
So what I think I'm hearing you saying is about the therapeutic futility might be about an acknowledgement of what is. Is that?
Yeah, so I think if we don't, we risk being too positive psych on things if all we're talking about is hope. We risk too much to forget about the darkness that we all hold. One of my original lecturers actually suggested there's a little bit of Hitler in all of us, and that's a heavy topic to say and to record on video right now, to say that out loud. So there's that too. And if we cannot acknowledge our evil dark sides, a bit like, dare I say it, but in Star Wars, with Darth Vader himself wasn't necessarily evil to begin with. Is the other point is in not acknowledging the darkness, we can't head to the light.
So it's again, if it's about holding those polarities, it's not about choosing one or the other. It's about the acknowledgement. It's really interesting you mentioned this thing. The first thing that came to mind was an example from a number of years ago. I was working in a non-government organization, and I was semi-supervising another counsellor who was doing a psychology route counselling thing. And she had taken somebody off the waiting list and started working with her. And then very shortly thereafter, I found the person that she was working with back on the waiting list. I'm like, oh, what happened? And so I contacted the client and said, oh, I noticed you back on the waiting list. Is everything okay? And got this, I can't remember exactly what was said, but it was along the lines of like, the therapist really didn't acknowledge how terrible my position was.
Yeah.
And just went into the strengths and how I'm coping and all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
I didn't need that. That was actually really unhelpful. And work with somebody else who will allow that to be there. So, and I found that really interesting. It was also very confronting to have that conversation with my colleague, but it was this whole thing of like, people can't begin to see the light until their darkness has been acknowledged in some way.
Yes. Well, whether it's the depression that they're experiencing, whether it's the what Jung would refer to as the dark night of the soul, which Jung's perspective was that was not about depression. It's actually a transformational process. So if we acknowledge that too, that sometimes some people might not necessarily be seeking therapy because of clinical depression. It might be that they're in a rough spot with grief, loss, trauma, and they're wanting to work it through to have that transformation. So there's many different polarities and acknowledged perspectives and positions our clients may be in.
Yes, and we don't always necessarily know their need. I remember when I had the conversation with a colleague about, I was wanting to know from the colleague's perspective what had actually happened. So I was being very careful about it. But just sort of what I ended up encouraging this colleague to do was to actually not rush too quickly to identifying strengths. I said, that's too easy. It's too easy. It's like a cliche if it's too early. And the client won't believe you.
Yeah, because we have to be real. We have to be real, no matter which angle we're looking at in therapy. Is if we are not congruent with the client, but also if the client doesn't feel like the therapeutic engagement feels congruent to their experience too. So it's not merely just our approach, it's also the client's approach and the client's feeling about what therapy needs to happen for them.
Which raises some very interesting things about the conversations we need to have when we first start working with clients. So what are you looking for from this process?
Yep.
Getting them to articulate as best they can in that particular moment in time, hey, this is where I'm at. And then as we progress, okay, you said back then this was what you wanted. Is this still what you want? Is this what you're looking for? Is this helping? Is this moving you where you need to go? So giving that constant feedback.
Yes.
A feedback loop from the client. Okay, are we heading in the direction that's working for you?
Absolutely. I just want to park that there for a second because I saw Annette. You had your sound off. You obviously wanted to say something, but you're very kind to be so patient. So I just want to go over to you what your thoughts are so far.
Well, I both personal and professional level, I have ethical issues at the moment with the virus and having that hope. And then I also used to call myself a Buddhist. Now I would say I'm more spiritual practicing Buddhist, but I won't go as far as calling myself a Buddhist because I'm not doing correct training. So I feel the suffering, but I also see the hope. But then at the same time, I had a client the other day who told me they were in a dilemma because they came from another country, living in Australia now. And they really they used to go home for Christmas holidays, summer holidays to their home country. They're religious, they're vegetarian, and they have very strong faith and belief in their background. It's their backbone of their whole life. And they were saying, how can I get vaccinated knowing what there is in the vaccine, the ingredients in the vaccine? How can I actually get vaccinated and stay true to my values, my foundation, everything my life is built upon? And then I'm feeling the same way. I'm a vegetarian for spiritual reasons and also medical reasons. And I could see where she was coming from. And then I was thinking, I'm a Dane. I'm also soon an Australian, but my mom is having her big 70th birthday next year. If permitted, I would like to go celebrate her, but that means I have to get vaccinated, probably because of the law changing. So where is that ethical dilemma, and how do I detach myself as an individual and still meet the client and go through the whole client process to be there for them and bring that hope to them that somehow it can still be done. And yeah, it was interesting that discussion because I recognized that I was a bit too close. I was
The parallel process was very what the client was going through was too close to what you were experiencing.
Exactly, yeah. And at the same time, I have this hope. I have a feeling of hope, and I feel it's both a feeling of hope, but it's also I feel the presence of hope. Even though every time I have been vaccinated for something, I've actually gotten very seriously sick. So I don't know if I need to hope that I have antibodies in me, so I may not need the vaccines or what it is about. But it was an interesting conversation because as much as I feel the suffering and the pain and the dilemma, I still felt there was a hope. There was something there that told me it's not going to be impossible. There was something will come up. And I think that's where with clients, if we can spark something in them and give them that hope that they're looking for, I think that will be wonderful to do. But you know, I told them to stop watching the news. So
I think that's a tip number one. Absolutely. As someone, and I can speak to this, who used to work on the news, not as a presenter or a journalist, but someone who worked in back rooms in the news before being a therapist, I can talk to this. It's often it's whatever's the most salacious will get the headlines. It really will. It's pretty sad, but it's true. And so this is the thing that we're often working with when our clients, might watch the news. It's how much fear are they buying into? How much anxiety are they buying into? What are the ethical issues that they're holding in their mind? It might be different to ours. And I feel like I want to share something quite personal. I've ended up having to pull away from my own therapist because I felt her countertransference. And about this, without sharing anything about her, I know a few personal things about her. There's a personal circumstance in her life that precluded her from being able to have an open conversation with me about this. So this is where things get really close to home. And I think this is probably important for those people listening back, is also, how are you having those conversations with your clients? And I think it comes back to my original training. We used to get taught so well about bracketing. I don't think anyone talks to bracketing enough these days. How do we bracket our own experience so that then we don't blah, 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 blah to the client? But even if we don't blah, 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 how can we still remain poker-faced so that they still have a safe space for them? Because it's not about us.
See, that was where I ended up as well, because I ended up saying, when I saw where this was headed, this session, I was saying, look, I'm not quite sure that I can stay the objective counselor that I want to be for you here. So if you feel there's something going the wrong direction, please let me know and I will refer you on. Because I remember, but like you say, the basic training had to kick in there. So I was very honest, and I was very quickly able to detach myself from the situation. But after the session, I spent an hour reflecting on that session and kind of thinking, okay, so where am I at? What am I going to do? And how can I be a better counselor for the next client who's going to bring it up? Because, this was my first client bringing it up, and I know there will be more. So it was an interesting conversation where luckily my years of experience kicked in and started going step by step.
Absolutely.
But it was, I luckily I also recognized, okay, this is too close to home. I need to make the client aware of this. And make them make the call. Do they want to continue or do they want to have another counselor?
Yep. Absolutely. Whew, yeah, this stuff is, it's getting really close to the bone. And I think even I noticed with the fires, it was very similar too, because I'm on the south coast of New South Wales. There was people in the south coast that were affected. It was, I feel like that was the start. So I was hearing stories from people's friends and family further south. So thankfully in my vicinity, around 50 kilometres around this area, we weren't really affected. But it was only about kind of 80 k's from my house where some of the major fires were. And so it was like, this is coming close. This is, and it was really impacting on me personally, because I had supervisees with family members, I had clients with family members, had people coming back and forth saying, I can't get down, so there was all of that kind of stuff. And that was just the start. We didn't expect what was coming. And then, we had the Vision for 2020 first one, around that time, and it was just so hectic. There was many people saying to me at the time, "Oh, Renee, are you still going to hold this conference?" And anyone who knows me knows I'm a bit on that kind of go with my gut. Something in me said very, very strongly, do not put the conference off. Interesting, hey? Something in me said that, and I just, went with that gut instinct. Isn't that interesting? We go with gut. A couple of people said, why don't we put it off till April? You'll have more people. Well, April was when COVID was well and truly in the mix. There would have been no vision for 2020, and we wouldn't be even having this conversation right now, probably. So this is what's also fascinating about what comes from going with your gut, but also going with it's going to be okay, and making that leap of faith. And I think that's also what my take on hope, that's also what hope's about, is actually taking the leap of faith. Yeah.
It's about living, it's not just breathing, but actually living your life. And because I remember the conference in January, I was only there one day because of the fires. Because I have asthma, so I lived very close to the fires we had here in Queensland as well. So I was really struggling in that sense, and I wanted to go to this conference. And I had hoped that I was going to be able to do it, and I made it happen in the way that it was all good for all of us. And that's where life, living, hope, being able to actually do what we want to do, but readjust so we're still keeping safe.
Yep.
And that's, for me, that's very hope. And yeah.
And I know that Pip the other night talked about transformation, but I definitely talked about that at the Vision for 2020 #1. And what I was talking to is the Phoenix kind of side of things. So I don't know how much you guys have ever been into the concept of a Phoenix. So I had this sense, a very strong sense, and I wrote a massive epoch poem. I don't know if you're into poetry, but anyway, so I do poetry when I'm like, what the hell is going on? That's when I get into my poetry. And I wrote it from this place of the Phoenix, and I had this sense that this year was going to be like the Phoenix. We needed to rise from the ashes, even if we were exhausted. And there was something in me that said, we need to keep rising. We need to keep rising, despite so much being flung at all of us on every different level. And I think what I even said to a couple of my clients over the last couple of months is, COVID is the great leveler. Just like trauma can be, but collective trauma, collective grief, collective experiences on a human-to-human level can be a great leveler, but it can also be a separator as well. So this is kind of almost like that dichotomy or the polarity as well, because everyone I'm seeing now has a different experience of COVID, or a different experience of hopelessness or helplessness, if they're going down that route. Because we can't move away from the fact, and I brought this up to a number of people, and this is quite shocking, is there were 5 10 to 14-year-olds that completed suicide in 1 week in late June, early July, around that time. And that was in my area. These are young kids that don't have hope. So this is why I think this conversation is so important to keep having, about how do you find hope in hopelessness? How do you find help when you're feeling helpless? And we can go back to in therapy terms like what is help-seeking behavior, blah, 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 blah. But I think more importantly is, who do you feel comfortable talking to? This is even to the therapists out there. So I've heard of a therapist who completed suicide, unfortunately. So, so this is kind of, it's hectic stuff. This is affecting all of us, no matter which angle we look at there. But it's not just about all these buzzwords of stronger together, but it's actually about having the conversations to gather together, to make meaningful conversations, to have meaningful conversations, to be there for each other in times of hopelessness, so that we can find hope in each other rather than just be stronger. And I think that's what I've noticed I need to be leaning into, Brene Brown's like leaning into the discomfort. So sometimes we actually have to go, this is really terrible. What am I going to do with this? What's like, this is terrible for me. I wonder how this has been for my clients. I've had clients that I was regularly seeing with no suicidality, no suicidal ideations before COVID, and they're there. These are people with really good jobs. This is stuff that we really need to be thinking deeply about. How are just your average people, coping at the moment? Not just merely, the people who are, the regular clients who have had, traumatic upbringings and what have you. What I found really interesting, and it's been a bit of a flip. Some of my clients, my more longer term clients who had issues growing up, major things, they've gone through their transformation and hope. They have more hope than the others often, which is, I've found that to be a fascinating viewpoint, and that they're able to find their hope quicker. They're able to find like meaning or just a purpose to keep going, or even just little things that then help them just keep going one foot in front of the other. So I just thought I'd also share that. Annette, how do you think your clients have been around that, for example?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I have a client whose nurse used to work for a major hospital in Melbourne, and she swapped to aged care facility on purpose, because she felt she would be a better use, and there was more hope for her being in an aged care facility compared to being in a hospital. She said she felt safer, and she felt she could be more of service by working in aged care compared to a hospital. And then I had another client who had severe anxiety, been in therapy for years, been on medicine 10 years, is off her medicine now, is practicing more holistic EFT tapping and breathing exercise, all these amazing things. And she said COVID gave her hope that there's actually more to life than what she was worried about. So that was quite interesting, that it gave her hope that she should get a little bit out of her head and start living more, because there is more to life. And she said she never thought about that before COVID. Yeah, it's been some interesting life changes as well for some of my clients. Some are packing up their city life and moving to the country, or even moving different country as well. So yeah, it's been very interesting to see the process that they have recognized, okay, I'm actually not living the life that I want to live. This is not in alignment with how I want it to be.
Yeah.
And COVID has brought that upon, that I actually can make a change. I can do it. There's hope for me, and I can still turn things around.
Yeah, absolutely. Neville, were you going to say something?
I'm just reflecting. I feel like the area that I'm in and the clients that I'm working with have had a very different experience of COVID than what I'm hearing both you and Annette talking about. We missed out on the fires. We got smoke that drifted across from your area, Renee, but we were far enough away from it to have no direct contact with that. And even the ones in South Australia, we didn't get affected by that directly either. What we did get affected by were the lockdowns in Victoria. So it's like, while I'm living on the New South Wales side of the border, I've had to interact with Victoria, because initially my office was over on the Victorian side of the river, Victorian side of the border, and the stress of managing the restrictions and the level of restriction that was being imposed. Even though regional Victoria didn't get it to the level that Melbourne did, they were still quite significantly affected. And it's only been this week, actually, that things are loosening up in a way that's feeling like, oh, it's a little bit back to normal. But what's interesting is that none of my clients are talking about COVID. And it's not that they couldn't, it's just they've had other focus. They've had other things that they wanted to bring to the table. And it's just kind of like we're working around this COVID thing, which I don't know if there was the hope that, hey, this is only temporary, so I'll just kind of suck it up and sort of work my way through this while I've got these other more important issues I'm coming to therapy about. I don't really quite know what the issue is, but I've really had so very few conversations around COVID at all. And it's kind of like, okay. I heard people complaining about wearing masks, but that's been kind of a side issue. It's not been a major stress, and it's been really.
I find that interesting. See, I often call a spade, and I come from the, I guess, the original teaching and training where you name the elephant in the room. And so I'm often naming the elephant in the room to the clients. Then they go, yeah, nah, yeah, nah. But they'll still then go, oh, and did you hear about blah, 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 so it's obviously on their mind, so I allow the opening of that conversation, and I don't shut it down, because I was taught around about the time of September 11.
Yep.
And I found it very helpful for me, but not only that, so did everyone in the class, to name the elephant and to be okay with expanding out of how are we all going around this and what's really going on for you, what's going on for me, what's going on for Mary, Jane, whoever else was in the class, and all that kind of stuff. And so it was actually naming it, and we were talking about that it's important to open up these conversations with people who wouldn't perhaps have the conversations with people at home, or be able to feel comfortable to have these conversations within their home or friendship groups, because sometimes it's like, oh yeah, everything's fine, everything's like a bit like the Lego movie, don't know if you've come across it, everything's awesome. So where then if we just have to scratch a little bit below the surface and it's there. Of course the clients have got issues as well, so I try to deal with both. So I'm actually working with it as a polarity too. It's another reason why I brought this in as COVID and hope, because that's what I feel like I'm actually working a lot with my clients. That even if it's not raised as the, I might say, oh, how are you going with that? It's they might shut it down, but I'm like, that's something interesting to note, just for my practice with them, if that makes sense. Yep. So that's just the school of thought I was trained in. Yeah.
And I hear that, and at the same time, where I'm coming from is like there's space for it, and I'm going to allow it to be there if that's what they want their focus to be. And it's sort of that tricky line of like, do I raise it or do I not? And it's kind of like, okay.
I'm of the opinion that we raise it, and I think it's a bit like just like staring it in the face, being okay with that, and saying, hey, it's okay. Yeah.
Yep.
A couple of months ago, I was hoping, and I was actually visualizing and meditating that I would have days where no clients would mention COVID. Because I was getting to the point where I was almost having compassion fatigue as a counselor, because I was getting tired of COVID. And now I have more and more days where COVID is never being brought up. There's so many other now, it's back to whatever their normal is or what they're dealing with. I was working with a company where they had a 4-hour rule every day for 4 hours. Nobody was allowed to mention the COVID name, no COVID-19 mentioned. If they did, they had to bring some food in the next day. They had cooked themselves. So,
that's cool.
Yeah. So it's been an interesting time, because the first many months, every single client I had, it was COVID one way or another. And I was working with them, I was meeting with them, but I could also feel, I think it was about 2 months ago, I started to have in my head, okay, I really want to have a day where no client mentioned COVID. And then soon after, it actually started to come. And I was thinking, okay, there's hope, there is
absolutely
hope. Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's
and
being human, you know.
Absolutely. And on that note, you know, I might mention it, but it's not a major topic of conversation. So I think it's just an interesting thing to hold. I feel like it's a tension we're holding now, if that makes sense.
Yes.
So it's a therapeutic tension we're holding, not a thing that I always have to hit the button. Yeah. That it's just, you know, I'll bring it up as a topic of conversation with a new client. I'll, you know, that kind of thing. It's that so that they know it's okay to talk about it, basically, you know, because it's this kind of fascinating thing where we don't want to have more neural pathways, you know, connected to it, and yet at the same time it needs to have a space to grow and then dissipate, so to speak, you know. So there's this kind of balance around that, I think, that we have to have around the neural pathways, and then so that neural pathways and making sure that it's not kind of so deep, and yet being human and being able to have the conversation too.
I think so, the tension is about giving it space, but not letting it take over.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's like your training, Renee, where we go through that space in between, like holding the space in between sessions and clients and all that. And the virtual space is very much there during sessions, but it's also between before and after and now. In that sense, and where are we heading and where are we going, and what do we have to change, or what do we have to let go of? And you know, the older we are, the less change we want to make. So how do we bring hope to the younger generation if we can see our grandparents are really struggling with making some changes? So yeah.
I think that's perfect, because that is one of the biggest issues, and this is why I brought in the younger people, really struggling, particularly whether it's my area or other areas. I know obviously they are in this area. It's how can people hold on to hope if they can't see that, you know, the older people being dealt with very well, or their grandparents or great grandparents not doing so well. This is what I've had to have conversations with my own children about.
Yeah.
And these are the struggles around making sure that everyone is okay, as well, to start the conversation rather than say this is how it has to be.
I have to go. So
yeah, no worries, Neville.
Lovely
See you next time. We'll continue the conversation, and maybe you can watch back.
Oh, that'll be great. Okay.
Yes. Awesome. Thanks, Neville.
Bye. Bye, Net.
Bye.
You know, it's interesting to see, you know, life and hope, and in a way the Bible is being rewritten, whether or not we want to admit it. But hopefully hope is going to have a bigger part. So yeah.
That is my hope, because in the Bible there's a discussion around the Revelations where the whole world kind of comes to an end. What if it's that the whole world comes to an end, and then there's a new rebirth, and that there's a transformational process? That would be my hope. And that's something maybe for everyone to sit with, is what if we can find a new path forward for the future?
That would be perfect. Yeah.
And
I think we can. So I truly believe we can. There's so much change going on in the world, and I was reading some post the other day about the coach was saying now it's the women who's going to come into power because the men has been messing up the world. And no offense to men, I love my partner and what have you.
Yes, I love my husband too. Yeah.
But it was interesting to see how what she said, and it kind of made sense to me, that listen to more people, broaden your horizons, and have an open mind, and see there is a different way to do it in a more holistic, healthier way for the earth and for the people living on the earth and the animals. So
Absolutely. And we don't hear that enough. Since this year started, we haven't been hearing enough in mainstream media or anywhere else about what can we do naturally to help ourselves. I've really been big within my own life to sit in with we need a more natural approach. And then what would that mean? And what would that look like? And how can I maintain my health and wellness rather than safety and fear? Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
And I think that might be a good place to finish this conversation. And I'll have to say goodbye to everyone listening in. And thanks, Annette and Neville, for joining us, and anyone who's listening back to this. Thank you for your time to listen into this conversation, and I hope this kind of masterclass conversation will help spring maybe some new thoughts around what the way forward for you might be.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and bye.